Okay, once your skull is finished and you're ready to fire it, in order to make it permanent, see, we're going to be painting these with acrylic paints later. And in order to do that, we need to fire the skull so that the clay is permanent and won't dissolve back down to clay. So in order to fire it, it needs to not be solid, and it needs to be a little bit thinner, and it needs to be completely dry. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little surgery on your skull, and we're going to cut the back of the head off. When you cut some of it, you want to make sure you're not cutting away like some of the details that you've carved, because then it's hard to get those details back. So I'm just going to kind of choose, I'm going to go right around this. Sometimes you have to be real patient and work at it until it comes loose. Oh, I feel it. It came loose. I'm going to work on, I don't want to smash the skull while I do this. So, real careful. Oh look, it came apart. And there's the paper armature that you put inside of it. We're going to pull that out. Now I could just stick this back together like this, but there's a problem. There would be like an enclosed air pocket that when it fires, it will explode. So we don't want enclosed air, we don't want it too thick. So there's a couple things I do. Oh, in fact, can you bring me that tool that's on your desk right there? That one, yeah. Thank you. There's parts of this that feel a little bit on the thick side. So if you feel around in your skull and you're like, oh, there's a little bit of a thick area, you can scoop out some of it with a tool like this. You just scoop out. I'm going to scoop out right where the teeth are. And as you do this, you want to be careful not to break through, so you have a hole in the front of the skull. But I'm just scooping out a little of the extra. This one's actually really good because there's not a lot of scooping that has to happen. But I know that a lot of times when I make a skull, I'll end up with really thick parts that I need to scoop all the way out so they don't blow up. I feel like that's pretty good. There's not a lot of scooping that has to happen. You can also go back on this side and scoop out a little bit. This doesn't have a lot though. So now I just kind of, you want to remember what side, I think it went right this way, right? So I'm going to connect these two sides together, and to do that I'm going to do something called scoring. I'm going to peel that extra paper off, and I'm going to score the edge with a needle tool. I'll take a needle tool and I'll scratch it all up like this. But I'm scoring a lot. You notice I just don't do a couple of lines, I do like lots and lots of lines, so you can't count them. And then I'll take some water or a wet sponge. I'm going to get my sponge wet. And I'm going to put some water on the edge of this. Getting it wet. I'm going to go back and I'm going to score it some more. What that does is it mixes the water in with the clay, and it creates something called slip on the surface of the clay. I'm mixing water with the clay. Okay, now if I do that on both sides of the skull, get that a little bit wet. please don't try to take shortcuts on this, because if you do, your skull might split apart when it's fired. Okay, here we go. So I have two sides that are completely scored and have slip on the edge. I'm going to put them together. Make sure the seam lines up. See, right now it doesn't look so great, does it? But I'm going to carefully wiggle this together. And you can kind of see the slip come oozing out of the joint where they come together. And I'm going to take my finger and smooth that together. And then I like to do something that is like a little bit of an extra safety measure, or I pretty much make sure that it won't split apart. And I'll go back and I'll score around the outside like this. See, I'm roughing up this surface by scoring it, and then I'm going to go back. I'm going to take a little bit of clay. I have a little bit of clay right here. I'm going to take some clay like this. It doesn't take a lot. I'm just going to roll out a little coil of clay, and I'm going to put it right over that seam, and I'm going to smear it into it. I blend it together. I will eventually, I'm not even going to be able to see that I ever cut it in half. So I'm going to do that around the whole thing. So, as a final step, this is looking pretty good, but as one final step, we're going to go back and, you know how I said if there's a trapped bit of air in there, as the clay shrinks as it's fired, the whole skull could explode. So, we're going to think back to our model of the skull, and there's always a hole in the bottom where the spinal cord goes. So, I'm going to cut a hole in this right here, and this is the part that you were saying sometimes you could tear the paper right out of the hole in the bottom, right? But this one, I'm just going to cut a hole in it. Now I know that the clay is not going to blow up because of trapped air, because the air has a space to get out.